Hi, I'm Mark and welcome to my channel. And this is not planned, it's just happening because I'm sorting out some books here, mainly because I'm running out of space. And it struck me, the way in which I read has altered since I've started doing Booktube. That's not to say that Booktube will do this to everybody or even is a good thing, but it's certainly altered the way in which I read. So for instance, this one, I think I read it in the past, but I would have just skimmed through it and hardly paid attention to it. And there's this phenomenon that if you are a driver and you're driving long distances, you ever been driving for half an hour and then suddenly you come to and think, you know what, I can't remember driving the last 10-15 minutes. Part of the brain switches off and you're focusing on other things. And I think that happens with books. I've read certain books, I'm sure I read this in the past, and I can't remember anything of it. But having seen the film recently, the one with Alfred Hitchcock, I think this did get some memories going of the book. So this is about the way in which my reading habits have changed. Not based on what I'm reading, but how I'm reading. I've always been a slow reader, that's for sure. And when I went to university, I would make notes in the books. But what's beginning to happen now, because I'm going to have to speak to camera, well, that's a wholly different thing. Suddenly you are looking for points to talk about, trying to get the rhythm of the narrative, the character building, and so on. That focuses the mind quite well. So anybody who does something similar throughout Booktube, I applaud them because it is quite difficult. It's bad enough speaking to camera, let alone doing it in a way that hopefully makes sense and do justice to the book. But that is exactly what has happened. So, for instance, Our Man in Havana. I would have just picked this up in the past and just flicked through it. Yeah, not a bad book. Probably moved on. But then you think, right, I've got to talk about the setting. So, for instance, there's a bit here which I will talk about again when I do the proper episode for this book. Graham Greene, having read Brighton Rock, he is quite a hard-pushing individual. He picks up easily on the seedy side of places and life, and he describes things very well. And he's talking about Havana in Cuba, and it says, "The long city lay spread along the open Atlantic. Waves broke over the Avenida de Maceo," although it's probably Avenida de Maceo in the local pronunciation, "and minted the windscreens of cars." Minted. The pink, grey, yellow pillars of what had once been the aristocratic quarter were eroded like rocks. An ancient coat of arms, smudged and featureless, was set over the doorway of a shabby hotel, and the shutters of a nightclub were varnished in bright, crude colours to protect them from the wet and salt of the sea. It was a city to visit, not a city to live in. No doubt when you're reading that, it will seep in and probably be forgotten. Just like going down that road and you forget that you've been driving for 10 minutes. But because I want to talk about such things to camera, it really has etched in that imagery into my mind. I can visualize things better by reading it slowly. And because I tend to move on, so I'm reading this book, I'll read 5 or 10 pages, then go on to the next one, 5 or 10 pages, and then the next one, 5 or 10 pages, 9 down the line, come back. I've talked about that, about how I take notes. But when I go back and reread the highlighted bits before I move on, it's like study, isn't it? Twice around, it's going to go into the head more. Very powerful. I can only say it's wonderful to do. I'd never done it before. Shame it took so long. Better late than never. So my reading has definitely altered, I would say, for the better, and that's because of Booktube. So for everyone involved in Booktube, Has reading books consistently or getting involved with Booktube affected the way you read? I can only speak for myself, and it certainly has. Well, there you go. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm glad that I found this wonderful community. So having put away the camera, having talked about how my reading habits have changed, I realised, I didn't mention a woman that I wanted to mention. So I've set up again, and I'm going to mention her. Anne reads books, and I'll put the link to her channel below. I subscribe to her, and she could really do with some help and support, like a lot of small Booktube channels that have just started. So please consider going over and saying hello. I don't want to be like MJ. She's the guiding light for supporting newbies. But she happened to do a video about a book haul. And one book caught my attention. And it was, I forget the title. It's a Japanese author. I think it's Before Your Coffee Gets Cold. It's in Tokyo in a cafe where you go in, you order a coffee, and before the coffee goes cold, you can go back in time and speak to someone in the past. And it's a lovely book. I was recommended it by my local bookstore owner. And it really was a good read, and Anne happens to be doing the same. And the reason I mention her, because the great thing about what has also changed with my book habits is that I'm listening to people now in this community who are bringing up books that I would never have considered before. Please pop over and see Anne's channel and give her some support. And then please, if you are interested, leave a comment here. I'd love to converse with you back and forth.